Hello, Gloria. I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. It's always fantastic to connect with you. You are the founder of Crafted Minds LLC, and you focus on creating opportunities for anyone interested in exploring craft beer. And you do this through teaching in a supportive environment and connecting with the beer community as a whole. And I'm excited to dive into that in just a little bit, but I want to ask you, how are you today, first off, and how's the past 15 months of pandemic been for you?
Hey, Andrew, it's awesome to see you as always. I'm really, really happy to be here and talking to you. I'm doing really well. It's been quite a busy season for me. The past 15 months, oh, wow. I would say, the pandemic, has been a blessing and a curse, more of a blessing than anything else. Not only for me, but just in general, how certain habits have changed in restaurants and pubs that I actually like, like the more cleanliness sides of things. And starting my business, I started it during the pandemic. So yeah, it's been pretty exciting actually.
That's an interesting point you made. You said the pandemic has almost been a blessing for you. Do you ever feel guilty when you say that?
I almost hesitated saying that just now. So yeah, I guess that might answer your question. Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing to say. I don't think that, death and disease is anything to feel blessed about. Certainly the past 15 months, just besides the pandemic, things that have been going on in society as a whole and in the craft beer community, some really ugly things have been happening in our world. So yeah, I do feel kind of guilty saying that it's kind of been a blessing in disguise for sure.
I feel the same way sometimes because it has presented a lot of opportunity. It's given a lot of us opportunity to hang out with family a little bit more than we would have. It's given people like you and I the ability to innovate and kind of launch businesses that have been internet based and allowed us to connect with so many great people. And that's been one of my favorite parts of the past year, just connecting with so many people virtually. But I am ready to see people face to face and have beers, together. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But with regard to your business, Crafted Minds, that you started, can you tell everybody a little bit about what you do in the education space?
Sure. One of the main things with Crafted Minds, kind of like the tagline is beer education for all. And I really do emphasize the all. Anybody from any background, whether you are in the industry or a craft beer enthusiast or just getting your feet wet and you're still drinking the macros, but you want to learn a little bit more. It really is something that's for all. And so what I do is I teach a basics course and an advanced course. And they run pretty seamlessly. They are separate from each other, but you could jump from one to the next, which some of my students have, or you could just jump right into the advanced, even with no experience whatsoever. That's the great thing about these courses is there's really no prerequisites. So.
And we're going to dive into a little bit more
Yeah.
about the content you cover later. But,
Sure.
with regard to the experience of launching a business during the pandemic, you're an educator and you're a craft beer educator. But what has transferring that to platforms like Zoom been for you? I mean, do you feel like you're always at a computer now? Do you enjoy it? Do you miss the in-person, or has it been a blessing once again?
I think I'm kind of used to the computer life as a beer writer. I've been a beer writer since about 2009. And so I've kind of been in front of the computer a lot, but I think now it's even more so because from 2009 to 2020, I was working for breweries. I was working at universities. So I did have those 9 to 5 or, jobs that had contact with, face-to-face interactions. But I think the thing that I really needed to get used to, and I'm still navigating it, is Zoom. I teach with Zoom. And so it's just like anything else. You just have to kind of learn the nuances. I work with Google Slides. I hadn't done that before. I had only had experience with PowerPoint. And I like Google Slides a lot better. So just little minor things, minor adjustments, but I actually enjoy working from home.
I think I enjoy working from home too much.
Yeah.
Although, sometimes it's just so easy to go downstairs for a minute, see my son, or take a quick break. And it's hard on days like today because I've intentionally closed my blue curtain over there because it's an absolutely gorgeous day here in Virginia. And
Yeah.
I wish I could be outdoors, but it's nice to connect with people all over the country. And I think that's been the opportunity through the pandemic for you, because you've been able to teach people. I imagine, what are you teaching internationally yet, or where are your students that you're?
Yeah. I've had students from all over the country and Ireland. And I'm based in Syracuse, New York, and which is in central New York. And so I've had students from Seattle, Nevada, Virginia, you name it, like name a state, California, even Hawaii. So yeah, I've had students from all over the place. It's been really, really cool.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, one thing I do want to talk about as well, the pandemic's been tough on a lot of us, attached to screens, not seeing our friends. People's drinking habits have been interesting, to say the least, over the past 15 months. What has your drinking habits been like since the pandemic began?
It's funny. People talk about, the pandemic and gaining weight, or the pandemic and drinking too much. And I would say I've fallen into both categories. It's just like this whole adjustment thing, where you're home all the time. Even though working from home is a choice before the pandemic, it seems like with the pandemic, you really, really feel like you're enclosed. And the bars were closed, the breweries were closed. So those places that my husband and I would go to visit for a beer or two were now not available. So gradually, and without really even noticing it until recently, I just kind of fell into this pattern of drinking every night. Not necessarily a lot, but it could be beer, it could be wine, it could be vodka, which is my choice, my liquor of choice. I like to make Moscow mules. And it just started to become like this regular kind of ritual, kind of like, waking up and having your coffee. It was just kind of like at the end of the day, like, oh, time for a beer, oh, time for a wine. And then it would continue on until it was like, time to go to bed. And I noticed that my body was really getting used to the alcohol. And I just kind of realized, like, okay, this is not what I want to get used to, even though it's my profession, even though I work in the realm. It's not necessarily something that I want to have for myself every single day, 7 days a week.
It's easy to fall into that routine. And for me, my routines have changed almost the opposite. I mean, like most people during the pandemic, I used to be the person who would go to the coffee shop 3, 4, 5 times a week. I haven't been to a coffee shop since all of this began. And someone said that, if you go 6 weeks without doing something or doing something, it then becomes a habit. So it's very easy to go one way or the other. And, I as well have found myself, it's so easy when you finish a long day, especially stuck in front of a screen, it's just easy to grab a beer, whether you want to say it's a ritual, whether you want to consider it a reward. There are definitely aspects to that take its toll on mental health, whether good or bad. It's something we should consider about ourselves. And one solution I found, I've had a bit of the non-alcoholic beers that have kind of filled that void. If I want to taste something that's slightly enjoyable, but I don't want to have, a beer every night, I can go that route. So it's been a fun challenge for myself. And I imagine you probably agree, to sometimes reduce consumption and find other opportunities and options to fill that space.
Oh, most definitely. A few months ago, I was asked to write an article for Business Insider about navigating the world of non-alcoholic beers, which I really didn't have any experience with other than, the 90s beers like O'Doul's, right? I didn't know anything about it. So I kind of just researched, and I interviewed the owners of places like Athletic Brewing Company, Big Drop, and Syria Brewing. And I found out, and I sampled all of their beers, and they taste amazing. from 0% alcohol to 0.5%. This week I've been drinking Big Drop. I've been drinking their pale ale, the IPA, and Athletic did a collaboration with Beer Culture called Soul Sour, and it was delicious. So I'm loving the whole non-alcoholic craft beer scene, if you'd like to call it that. I'm enjoying it. It's nice to fall back on. Even if I'm drinking, I know I can slow down and have, an Athletic or a Big Drop or a Syria or another brand. I know Brooklyn has one too.
One of the things I really enjoy about the non-alcoholic community is the positivity. And we are in the internet right now. The internet craft beer groups for non-alcoholic beer are so welcoming. And so often you'll join like a regular alcoholic craft beer group, and it can get a little toxic sometimes. If you don't like the most double dry hop, super sour smoothie, dare I say, seltzer out there right now, you might get made fun of a little bit or not accepted. But I've found there's a lot of inclusivity and welcoming in nature to a lot of these non-alcoholic groups, and I absolutely love that. And I'm agreeing with you 100%. They've been something nice to fall back on. The options have gotten quite delicious over the past while. So it's a fun sect of alcohol to dive into, or for drinks to dive into.
Oh, totally. I'm happy that it exists and that I have access to it whenever I want and whenever anybody wants, honestly.
Cool. I'll have to go back and read that article you put out. It's like a fascinating document. It kind of goes right along with your desire to constantly educate. Yes. But now I'm going to go in the way back machine and learn a little bit more about you. Okay. So, Gloria, where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Syracuse, New York, where I'm located right now. But I haven't lived here my whole life, but I'm back.
Well, welcome back. And when you were growing up in Syracuse, when you were just a kid at the elementary school, trying to make your way through school, if we had met back then and I had asked you what you want to be when you grow up, what would your answer have been?
I wanted to be an astronomer.
Why?
I just loved the way the planets, or at least the illustrations of the planets at the time when I was growing up, they just looked so colorful, and space just was so vast and fascinating at the most basic level that like 6 or 7 year old me could comprehend at the time. I just wanted to just like study the stars and the planets, and I chose that topic as like my science fair project a few times, and I loved it.
Did you make like a diorama of all the planets out of styrofoam?
Yep, exactly.
I feel like that's a rite of passage for most elementary school students of some sort.
Totally. I never did the lava volcano, but I did do the styrofoam planets.
Now, is this a fascination you had that kind of went past your elementary school years? Did you ever pursue additional education in it?
No, I didn't. I just, as the years went on and I got older, I just kind of discovered that math and science were not my strengths. And it was more about the fine arts and languages and literature and grammar and all that, just reading was my thing. And so that's where I kind of leaned in towards, the liberal arts schools and things like that. So that's where I ended up as an undergrad.
Even back then, were there any authors that made a big impact in your life?
I would have to say, being a Spanish major, I read these in Spanish. I really like the works of Mario Vargas Llosa. And I haven't read his stuff in a long time, but like there's something about literature, not necessarily from any specific Latin American country or Spain, but like we were exploring at one time like modern realism and postmodernism, and like I had no idea what that was. And it's still kind of elusive, when you think about it. But just talking about these concepts in literature that went beyond, the classic, boy meets girl, boy falls in love with girl, they have a conflict and then they get back together, like the movies. Like I just kind of liked delving into things that were kind of a little bit more on the, I don't know how you would say it, just a little harder to grasp. And, and I never quite got it. I never really quite understood postmodernism, even though I read a lot of books, but at least I had an understanding of what it was.
And you were trying to educate yourself. And at this time, were you also writing?
No, I honestly didn't start writing until 2009 when I started my blog.
So were you going to school for what at the time? Something in literature, Spanish?
Actually, I went to Hobart and William Smith colleges here in upstate New York, and I got my bachelor's in Spanish. And, to be quite honest with you, as a high school, 17-year-old, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know, what major to choose. And so since I knew my Spanish language skills were strong from studying alone, because I didn't grow up speaking it. I did not speak Spanish at all until I was 17. So, and I didn't know how to write it or anything. So like I made sure I taught myself the language that is of my culture. And so, going to college, I was like, okay, well, let me just major in Spanish. I know I'll understand it. Let me see where this takes me. And I really enjoyed it.
And as you were going to school for Spanish, what did you want to do when you graduate? Did you have that master plan where you wanted to be a translator? Did you want to go be a teacher? What had interested you? What were your goals?
I was, when I got my undergrad degree, I still was confused. I still was like, I don't know what I want to do. Do I want to get my master's? Do I want to go straight into the work world? What is it that I want to do? Where do I want to live? So what I ended up doing was I moved to Washington, D.C., and I did an internship at a legal aid clinic, and I helped immigrants who were seeking political asylum. What I did was I spoke Spanish and I translated legal documents, and I'd go to court with them, and I really liked that. And I thought, well, maybe I want to be a translator, interpreter, and I was like, maybe I do that, or maybe I get my MBA. I just really, again, I was still very like, what do I do? And I worked in DC for about 4 years in the Latino nonprofit world. And that was really good, but it wasn't my calling. I wasn't like a grassroots mover and shaker. I didn't know the politics enough at the time of the Latino movements that were going on in the 90s in DC. So I didn't really feel connected to that. So I ended up applying to Columbia University, and I got my master's in Spanish. That was what I decided I wanted to do.
So you went to DC, spent about 4 years there. It sounds like that must have been a very rewarding experience, though.
I loved living in DC. It, being in your early 20s, at the time, it was just this really vibrant scene. I lived in a neighborhood called Adams Morgan, which was primarily Salvadoran and Ethiopian. So there was a lot of culture going on, like right in front of my eyes. And I made lots of, valuable friendships. And, when you're in your 20s, you want to explore and meet people and have a good time. And so there were plenty of places just in DC alone, even in the neighborhood of Adams Morgan alone, to just go out and socialize and have like the time of your life. I loved it.
At that point in time, was craft beer even on your radar?
Not at all. No.
So when you would go out and have fun, what was the ideal Friday night like for you back then?
The ideal Friday night, and if one of my friends watches this, she's going to laugh, because there was this club in Adams Morgan. It was a West African club. It was called Kilimanjaro. And it was this great place to go dancing West African music. But they had like the best happy hour. So it was like, from what I can remember, it was like buy one, get one free Heinekens, or it was Heineken or so. I remember the beer was in a green bottle. So I'm pretty sure it was Heineken. Or maybe it was Rolling Rock, but it was like really super cheap, so like we went there more like in the beginning to get the cheap beer, but then the music was so great, like it just became like this Friday happy hour thing, to dance to this like awesome, West African music and, and get a cheap buzz, honestly.
That sounds like a great experience. I think we all had those times in our early 20s where you could, fill your belly and get a nice buzz for $10 and it was a good Friday night out. It's
totally
how our tastes and habits change over time.
Totally. Things definitely change.
So you left DC, gave up all the great Friday night dancing and decided to go to Columbia to become a professor of Spanish. So you were an educator by then. I mean, was there that moment when you really decided you wanted to teach?
Well, while I was doing my master's, part of that I was teaching during my studies. I was substitute teaching, in New York City. And the thing is, I really wanted to stay in New York. But as my master's was ending, I was applying to schools with the New York City, school district, and I couldn't land a job. I just could not land a job in New York City. And I'm like, well, I'm not from here. I can't afford it here. And there was a job opening at Syracuse University. And, I thought, okay, this is education, higher education. The job was not for teaching, it was actually for an academic counselor. And what I did was I helped advise students, help them pick their courses, listen to, their struggles of being a first-year student or a sophomore. And I did that for about 3 years. And I taught Spanish at Syracuse University too as a professor. That was my first time actually teaching.
It sounds like the counselor position was almost a combination of what you did in DC, just helping people, and you combined it with your educator background to help make a difference.
Totally. I never thought about it that way, but yeah, definitely.
It makes perfect sense when you explain it to me. I'm like, well, of course Gloria would love doing that.
Yeah.
So you made the shift eventually, though, to teach more full-time?
No, I always stayed in the academic advising as the full-time and adjunct professor as the part-time, always. I never did full-time professor teaching.
And no, at this point in your life, had you been a traveler yet? Because I know that also plays an important part of just who you are as a person. Were you traveling the globe yet, or what did you like to do?
Yeah, no, I guess I've been traveling since I was a child because my parents are from Mexico City. So ever since I was 4, we would go to Mexico City like every other summer. And then I would go with my sister alone as a teenager. And I studied at the university there for a semester and learned Spanish. Like I said, I didn't grow up with it, like speaking it at all. So I had to learn. And so, when that happened, going to Mexico a lot, that was like the basis of the travel that I did. It's so weird, I had lived in, my whole upbringing in Syracuse, but had never been to New York City. And it wasn't until I was 21 that I actually did go to New York City for the first time. I went to Canada a lot more than I ever did New York, because Canada is a lot closer to Syracuse than New York. But yeah, I would say I always had the travel bug in me just because of my early years. And I did a study abroad in my undergrad. I did a semester abroad in the Dominican Republic, and my internship there was teaching a classroom of grade school, elementary school kids. I taught them. So yeah, I've always traveled as much as I could, but there's always more that I want to do.
So that's interesting. Kind of going on the travel note for a moment, just looking at your entire life, what are your top few destinations you've had the opportunity to visit? Has there any cities, any countries that just completely wow you?
I would have to say, well, I love New York City. Always will. Living there was wonderful. I now that I live close enough, I go there as much as I can. I would have to say Montreal definitely stole my heart. And I used to go there frequently. And I met a lot of brewers and brewery owners. And at one point, I was very much into the craft beer scene of Montreal. And really the only reason that I kind of, moved, I don't want to say moved on, but just did other things, was I moved to Florida. So Montreal wasn't easy to get to. And then the pandemic, now moving back home, I can't go there. I would also have to say a trip that I made to Finland and Ukraine was also really enlightening, because when people think of going to Europe, or even for beer travel, you're thinking, Belgium, England, Germany, and then Europe in general, France and Italy, you don't think, oh, I'm going to go to Finland. And actually Finland was a place that got me into craft beer. It really was.
Now you've got me very intrigued, because you can't just leave me on that cliffhanger.
Okay.
So Gloria went to Finland, and what happened in Finland?
Well, I went to Finland with my husband. He was there for a work trip, and our first night there, our hotel had a bar and a nightclub, and we just wanted to just like have a pint of whatever. And at this point, I was not into craft beer. I liked beer, but I still wasn't really. And there was all this like foreign beer that, we don't have access to. And there was this lovely stout. At the time, I had never heard of it, Beamish from Ireland. So it wasn't actually a Finnish beer that turned me on. It was a Beamish, and it was so delicious. And so just by having that beer that one time, the rest of the time we were in Finland, and I went there twice to Finland. So every day that we were there, we discovered different breweries or craft beer bars. They have a really crazy craft beer scene in the city that we stayed at. We were not in Helsinki, we were in Turku. And they have these beer bars that used to be a bank or a public toilet house or an old pharmacy. So you go into these places and they're clearly, you can tell that you are in a bank, but now it's a craft beer bar. Or there was one that was a Swedish school, and they still have all the old like school desks there, but you see all the tanks and everything. And so that was when I really was like asking all the people that work there the questions about beer and how it's made, and all these different tastes and everything. And that's really what got me started.
And approximately what year was your trip to Finland?
I went to Finland twice in 2008.
I have never been to Finland, but now you make me want to go.
It's great.
My wife and I, we love traveling as well, and we love going to the, I don't want to call them undiscovered countries, but not the touristy ones, not the England, not the France, not the Spains.
Right.
On our honeymoon, we had the opportunity to go to Croatia, and you felt like you weren't in a tourist attraction. You were driving on beautiful countrysides, and you would see an abandoned castle up on the mountain, and you pull over and try. Then you pull over on the side of the road and see a little old woman selling their local liquors, and it was just a fantastic experience. It's always it's great places you're not expecting that you find something that stands out.
Totally. I'm with you 100% on that. And I'm always looking for the local slant. Like, I don't want to do the tourist things. Like when I was in Finland, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the mall and I'm going to figure it out. And I don't speak Finnish and I don't speak Swedish. And I figured out how to use the local bus system, and I asked people questions with the limited Finnish that I learned from like a tape, and I like just getting by in places where, like you said, it's like undiscovered or not as well discovered.
Yeah, definitely not as touristy. It's definitely a personal challenge of mine as well, and something I really enjoy. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily putting myself in an uncomfortable situation, but putting myself in a challenging situation that dares me to get a little more crafty and resourceful and find ways to make connections with people in my environment that aren't your typical ways to connect with people. And it's so rewarding when you go on a trip like you went to Finland and were able to do that. I mean, you're making me miss travel, especially travel right now.
I love traveling. I love it, and then we also, during those trips, we went to Sweden and Ukraine, and, just like going to Eastern Europe is just like so different, from like, just going from Finland to Ukraine. It's like, whoa, culture shock, European culture shock, and they have their own beer thing too. They have their own beer scene there, and they've got breweries from the 1700s in Ukraine. that unless you live in a city like Syracuse that has a significant Ukrainian population, you're not really going to get your hands on some of these beers. And they're worth exploring, definitely.
You've got me so intrigued right now. So where's next on you and your husband's travel list?
Well, the very next thing for me is I'm going to Miami next week.
Say that one more time. The audio went out for a second.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to Miami next week for about 2.5 weeks. And I am actually going to don't laugh, I'm going to be cat sitting. I'm going to be cat sitting in South Beach, but during my time, I lived in Miami for 10 years, so I am very much familiar with the craft beer scene in South Florida. So I've already reached out to my connections, and I've already got, some dates set aside to go hit breweries and, just get caught up with what the Miami beer scene has been like since I left, and, and introduce my beer friends to Crafted Minds.
Now that's very exciting. I think you deserve a trip. Have fun watching the cat and catching up with some old friends and new while you're down there.
Definitely.
So I want to go back to what you've done in your life, because you were in the collegiate world for quite some time, but then you decided you didn't want to be an academic anymore.
No.
At what point in time did you decide to leave your role at the universities and decide to kind of focus more on your blog, The Hoppy Nomad?
Well, for a long time, I was doing them simultaneously. So I'd be working full time and I'd be writing articles, and I got like a job writing articles for a local Syracuse newspaper, a monthly newspaper. So like that didn't necessarily take up tons of my time. So I could work 9 to 5 and then do my blog and then, and write for the newspaper. And even while I was still working in the higher ed, I had really noticed a lack of women in the craft beer industry at the time, and not just women working in the industry, but like going to craft beer festivals in upstate New York. Like I just noticed all the people around me were, white men. And so I thought to myself at the time, I was like, I would love to get women together and start a group. So that's what I did. While I was still working full time, I started the Syracuse Women of Craft Beer. And I think when I did that, that's kind of what really set the pace for me to move out of higher ed and into beer full time, because it was when I was leading that group that I really got a feel for the industry behind the scenes, learning the basics of brewing and beer and cheese tasting. Like there's just so much education in beer alone, and then you've got craft beer and styles. And like, I was fascinated as I was doing this group, and I was like, okay, this is definitely something I see myself doing. And, being in higher ed after, 14 years or so, I guess, I don't want to say it lost its luster. I would just have to say that my time was kind of coming to a close. I just felt like it was time for me to move on to another chapter in my life.
At any point, did you feel like it was a balancing act between your higher ed role and your kind of desire to get further into craft beer, that you had to choose one or the other?
Yes. There was one job at a college I worked at, I won't mention, that I needed sometimes to leave just like a half hour early, because at that time I had gotten a part-time job as a brand ambassador for Great Lakes Brewing out of Cleveland, Ohio, and I was the Syracuse brand ambassador. And so what that meant for me was I would have to conduct beer tastings at different venues, and sometimes I would need to leave my 9 to 5 at 4:30. And, I was assured in my interview that would not be a problem by my future boss, that no problem. But you know what? It actually ended up being a problem. Leaving early, and it wasn't every day. It was like maybe once every 3 weeks. It was never anything that regular. Wow. But it just wasn't working for either side. I just felt like, okay, I'm kind of being not necessarily pushed or forced out of higher ed, but I felt the gravitation towards craft beer, especially when I started to see that, okay, I need to start making some choices.
So that's a really interesting point you make there. It sounds like you were losing your passion a little bit about higher ed, but at the same time, you were still passionate about being an educator.
Right.
Because being a representative for a brewery, I'm sure you were constantly educating people about Great Lakes, the brewery, their brand. So were you carrying those skills as an educator from your higher ed career over to the beer industry at that point? Is that how it felt?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, having been an educator, you know, in higher education for as long as I was, you know, like I knew the importance of an education in general, just for me, for myself, and for others that I wanted to support. But when it came to beer, I was like, I'm clueless. You know, how am I going to learn? You know, if I didn't, you know, take the initiative to volunteer at beer fests, to explore and dig in a little deeper, like nobody was going to teach me unless I got a job, you know. And then I got the job at Great Lakes, and I did get educated from Great Lakes. You know, I had a good training. So I think, yeah, I mean, my education skills definitely, you know, what's the word am I looking for? They're transferable skills. You know, they definitely transferred over seamlessly.
Training is something that's not given enough stock sometimes in the craft beer industry. Training is important, whether you've been in the industry, you know, 10 years and you're working at a new brewery, you need to learn their systems, you need to learn their philosophies, their culture, and how they teach, or whether you're a brand new person just first working their industry job. Yeah. So when you were at Great Lakes, you know, what did you like about the way they taught you about craft beer?
I think what I really liked about Great Lakes, number one, was it felt like, even though I was located in Syracuse and the brewery was in Cleveland, they always made me feel like a part of the team. You know, that was the first and foremost. Like, I felt like, even though I was a part-time employee in another city, I felt like I was very included, and that my beer education was really important to them because I was representing them. And so the way they took their beers was very organized and simple to learn.
And at that point in time, you know, let's do it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being a brand new craft beer drinker, 10 being the beer nerd that you arguably are today. Where were you with your level of personal craft beer knowledge at that point in time?
I would say something like a 4 or 5.
So you were starting to get up there. You were learning.
Yeah, I was learning.
And at this point, were you thinking of craft beer as your next career, or was it more so a stop along the way?
I knew it was going to be in my life, one way or another.
And I want to go back to the fact that you would go to these beer fests and you wouldn't see a lot of women, you wouldn't see a lot of people of color. And you started the Syracuse Women of Craft Beer. And with the Syracuse Women of Craft Beer, you know, did you already have these women you were drinking with and spending time with, and you were like, hey, let's call ourselves the Syracuse Women of Craft Beer, make it official, and try to teach more people about, you know, the joys of craft beer, and especially women? Or what was the process of like starting that organization like? Was it just you and you just had to reach out to people? You know, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you went through in those years.
Yeah, it was just me. It was the idea I had in my head. And I had learned about meetup.com, which is basically a website where people join different groups based on affinities. And so I thought, well, I don't know a lot of women in Syracuse. I have very, very few female friends locally, and I'd love to meet other women who have a similar interest and want to learn, because I wanted to make sure that this was not a happy hour group. This was not a group that just gets together and drinks. I wanted to make sure that we were learning something every single time we met. So I made the motto, drink, share, educate. And so I got online and I started a meetup group, and I didn't really need to advertise, honestly. This was in 2014, and the women just showed up. They just started joining on Meetup, and then I had my first meeting and it was 14 women. We met at the World of Beer, and I would hold monthly meetings at different breweries or brew pubs, and I would make sure that we would get a tour or have some sort of educational component. So it was very deliberate. It would be like, okay, half hour meet and greet, then 45 minutes for the brewery tour and, the educational part, and then the rest wind down. So there was always an agenda. It was always, I guess, because I am an educator, I had a structure. It wasn't just like, oh, hey, come on, let's drink and hang out and talk about what we taste. We went beyond that.
So these women who were interested in joining your chapter, did they have similar frustrations as you with the current state of the craft beer industry in New York?
Absolutely. I had women coming, out of the woodwork saying, oh my goodness, I just look so forward to our monthly meetings. I have not met anybody that shares my interests. My boyfriend, it's not the same. Or when I'm with my boyfriend and his friends, I get intimidated and I don't want to join in the conversation about beer. A lot of women were intimidated just to talk about beer in public or ask questions. So there was a relief, definitely.
So wearing your educator hat with this organization, what were your goals by having all of these women meet up?
My goals were basically, really to drink, share, and educate at the most basic level. There is that social component. So relationships were formed. Some women actually even got out of their careers and moved 100% into the craft beer industry because of being in the group. So, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Syracuse Women of Craft Beer changed some women's lives. It really did. And it may not have been a goal that I saw when I started it, but, as the months and years went on, I could really see what a difference this was making in these women's lives. And that's what mattered most to me was, feeling heard, learning what you want to learn about in the way that you want to learn about it. That was really the goal.
And how large did your chapter in Syracuse grow to be?
We grew to about over 100 members.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, not everybody, it was a meetup group, so, not everybody would come. We definitely had our hardcore group that would be there every single month and would help me out, setting up or cutting things. If we had a cheese and beer thing, they would help out. We hosted annual anniversary parties. We had huge crowds come to our parties, breweries donating their beers, musicians donating their time, and just throwing a huge party for the Syracuse community. So we grew. We really grew to a big group.
And you obviously made a difference with so many of these women, but were your goals ever greater than just the women in your chapter? What was it to change craft beer as a whole? Were you thinking about the bigger picture at this point?
A little bit. I think one of the things that I still was lacking in the group was women of color in my group. Out of the 100 or so, there were 3 of us. And that was it. And, I'm happy for that. But at the same time, I really didn't know how to reach people of color. I didn't know how to market that. I really was lost in that sense. So that was an area that I was like, I want to see some change too.
Interesting. So you started thinking about how you could better reach women of color. How did you think you could do that? Did you start writing notes? Did you start writing almost like a marketing plan of different attempts to try? What was that process like?
Well, to be honest, thinking about that, I felt at the time was impossible. I thought it was something that could not be done in my community. And it's not like I gave up and said, oh, you know what, forget it, I'm not going to bother. It was more of a resignation kind of feeling like, if you build it, they will come. And I thought maybe eventually more people would come around, but I really didn't have a master plan for, reaching the Latina community or the African American community or the Pacific Islander community. Syracuse is very diverse, so I'm surprised that we only had 3 people, including myself, of color in our group, and I never got to see that fulfilled.
So does this Crafted Minds seem like Syracuse Women of Craft Beer almost part 2?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it's an extension of my love for educating and making beer education accessible. And there's no focus on women in particular. And then the other side of it is really making the education inclusive for all. And, that's why if you go to my website, it's, I say it right in front, front and center, beer education for all. So I don't want to think of Crafted Minds as the Syracuse Women of Craft Beer 2.0. I really don't think so. I think they were separate things that came out of a passion to teach about, and a passion for craft beer.
And craft beer still is lacking very heavily in diversity. What are your goals through Crafted Minds to help with that?
Well, the goals of Crafted Minds really, is, and social media has changed, I have to say this part, since 2014. The way that I approached the Syracuse Women group, as opposed to how I'm approaching Crafted Minds with advertising and marketing, is completely different. So I think with the way social media is now, and the fact that, just our country is going through all these, like, they're not awakenings, but they're more about, raising awareness on, the lack of diversity in craft beer. So me being a craft beer educator, this is where I'm like, okay, I want to collaborate with this group, or I want to be a part of this, initiative. So what I've done, behind the scenes, is definitely been collaborating with other women of color, and being in panels like this, talking on YouTube Live or whatever medium to just let everybody know that, we're out here. Another way that I try to reach the diversity is, I'm always a beer writer, no matter what. So I've already interviewed some people that I want to write about, actually, that have some really great stories when it comes to the beer culture, for instance, in Los Angeles, and the Latino homebrew scene. Like, California is so far away from me, but it's so close because of, like you were asking about the pandemic. I don't think I would have met some of these innovators and these these people of color in beer had it not been for this time that we're living in. So I'm definitely using those resources and, marketing to more.
So that's interesting that you've been able to connect with people like that during the pandemic, because previously at your early beer fest you would go to, I imagine you'd have to kind of play like Where's Waldo through the crowd looking for another woman or another person of color. But you're finding people like you and other people of color and other people not looking like me in craft beer on the internet. How are you finding one another?
Well, I'm on social media a lot, number one. So you just, it's a matter of putting a hashtag in, really, and, they pop up, or I'll hashtag a subject and more people will follow me. An example, I was on my Instagram and I have no idea how she popped up, but her Instagram is Black Beer Chick, Eugenia Brown. And
Eugenia's fantastic.
Yeah, she's awesome. And so, like, I met her and, she's helped me through my craft beer education because I'm studying to be a certified Cicerone. And, without getting into the details of all the things that she's done, because there's so many, like I just got connected, one hashtag and one connection leads to another, to another, to another. And then I got connected also through LinkedIn. So this gentleman in California found me. And so, I spoke to the homebrew club in Southern California. So I don't know, it just kind of happens. It just was like very organic in some ways.
So you're training for your Cicerone now. So talk a little bit about the content that you're teaching to others.
Sure. So the beer basics class, right now I'm offering 2. I definitely, once I've got a little more, time underneath my feet, I'll definitely be teaching more classes. But what I'm teaching right now is the beer basics. And all of my classes are 6 weeks long, and they're all online. And they're live. So, participation is, for me, key. And this is probably from my professor days, getting people engaged and not just having me talk and lecture, and having that interaction. And since beer is a sensory experience, it's really easy to do that. So the basics is really just getting your feet wet. I talk about beer's history. We talk about the ancient Sumerians, up to the Middle Ages, to modern. And we talk about the ingredients, the brewing process, tasting, smelling. We practice, the different ways of sniffing, tasting. And then we get into the specific beer styles by region or country. And then we wrap up with the beer and food pairing, which is a lot of fun. It's very interactive. The beer and food is totally, people are like, oh, I can't wait, because it's a lot of fun.
I mean, who doesn't love that portion? So your students, Gloria, are they people working in craft beer? Are they just craft beer enthusiasts? Who is finding you on the internet, just seeking you to learn?
I have a range of people in my class. Certainly people in the brewing industry, maybe not necessarily brewing. Like I've got somebody who is in accounting at a brewery. So she wants to learn more since her employer is, beer. And I've got people who are home brewers. I've got people who say to me, well, my husband's a home brewer and I want to learn more. I want to participate. I want to do this. So it really runs the gamut.
So that's an interesting point. I had a conversation the other day with someone. We talked about, so often we hear about brewery owners talking about, if we want to make craft beer more welcome and inclusive, it starts at the top, the brewery owner, the managers, the staff, and then it'll radiate outward. Mm-hmm. But what if we start with the home brewer, the person who's just now brewing? What if we teach people, not necessarily typical home brewers, not the white male with the beer we typically envision when we talk to home brewer, but what if we expand the diversity of craft beer and start with the home brewer versus at the brewery, and teach them about the value and why we love craft beer to help make our industry more diverse and inclusive? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think, home brewing, some people start with home brewing knowing zero. I'm sure there's plenty of people who drink macro and get right into home brewing and dive in, just dive right in. And, I really like that way of learning too, because that's how I've learned a lot of things, is just by, running into the fire, so to speak, just go all the way with it. So I think, having that hands-on training by physically brewing your own beer while learning about other aspects of the beer, like smelling, sniffing and tasting, and your taste buds, and, the 5 flavors, you're not necessarily learning that when you're learning how to brew. So I think it's a nice complement to the home brewer. And I think that, that is a really good starting point is with brewing, definitely.
Now, continuing on education, if time and money and distance, they weren't a factor, if you could just accelerate your business model of teaching as many people as you can about craft beer, what are a couple steps you would take to educate more?
That's a really good question. I mean, for me, number one, it's about quality, not quantity. But also, this is a business, and and I want to reach as many people as I can. If I can educate, I don't have a goal in terms of a number, but I think, just being able to teach online just literally opens the world. It really, really does. So that's the way I'm reaching people, is really through different organizations like Pink Boots. The people that I've met, I say, here, share this information. And that's how, little by little, I think it's like the word of mouth kind of thing. Maybe you start out with 5, but then the next time you have 10, and then you've got 20, and then you've got 50. You know what I mean? So I think it's one of these kind of gradual things that, ask me in a year where I'm at. Hopefully I'll tell you, I'm booked solid, and I'm teaching 5 days a week. That's the goal, to make this a full-time endeavor. But yeah, that I don't really have like a plan in terms of like, okay, this is a strategic plan of how I'm going to get more people. I want to reach as many as I'm able to. And now that things are opening up in person, like me going to Miami and hitting the breweries there and making connections is another way to reach more people in a totally different geographic area. I'll be going to Denver in September to the craft beer conference, reaching as many people as I can there. And, little by little, your community grows.
I look forward to sharing a beer in September for sure. But
Likewise.
You're doing amazing work just educating people about craft beer. Looking at breweries, what is some advice you can give to breweries that you would like to see them do to help create these more welcoming, safer spaces?
Well, I think that craft breweries, you've got such a range of craft breweries, right? In terms of size, location, culture. A lot of things have been coming out about toxic work cultures in so many arenas. That's really disheartening. But I would say first and foremost to people who brew or who own breweries, education is a huge component. It's like when I was in higher ed, right? So when I was in higher ed, this is like an example that translates, I think. When I worked in higher ed, I was an academic advisor, and I was in charge of academic advising at one point. And I would train professors to advise do academic advising. And there was always this like resistance because they don't want to be told that they're the experts, So it's kind of like the struggle of trying to get people to educate. And so I think with brewers and owners, they may not think education as something super valuable yet. They're busy in the day-to-day operations and the brewing schedules. But I think if they could make room for education, whether it's in-house training or somebody like me to go down and work with your staff, I think that the workplace would be a lot friendlier and sales would go up.
I absolutely love that. Education is such a vital aspect of our industry, and sometimes we just need to take a step back, look at the picture, and teach ourselves something, and that way we can make the industry better. And you're right, sales will go up too, because when you can connect with people better through education, there's value to it. I had an interesting conversation this past summer with someone who owns a cidery, a cider house, whatever the correct term is for a place that serves cider these days. And they were just reopening following the first closure of COVID. And they had lost all their original staff. And what started was they hired a couple teachers, out of work teachers who just wanted to do something. And these teachers, they didn't know anything at all about cider. But guess what? They were educators. They loved talking to people. And he ended up with a staff of teachers who were passionate about educating other people. And while they knew nothing about craft beer or cider, they did an amazing job. So, look, Gloria, I just love talking to you and the power you preach behind education, because it's so important.
Thank you
I
so
really
much.
thank you for hanging out with me today, enjoying these last few, hopefully, months of, or less of these interactions like this. And I'm
Yes.
looking forward to that beer together in September.
I'm looking forward to it. And thank you so much for having me. I had a great time. And yeah, I'll see you in September.
In September. Cheers.
Bye.